Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description. Welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on a very sunny Friday morning. Thankfully, it's Ryder Cup weekend, so if you're a golf fan like myself, you'll be in a very good mood. I'm joined as usual. Well, I'll say as usual. You're a new addition to the podcast, aren't you, David? I'm joined again by David McDonald. David McDonald, how are you?
I'm good, Steve. You well?
Yeah, very well. As I say, looking forward to watching the golf. We're obviously down at Brentford on Saturday. I'm getting the train down. I believe you're driving, aren't you? So that gives me a chance to watch the golf on the way back on the train. So I'm happy about that. Have you got Oasis tickets in the end?
No Oasis tickets. So I'm going to be driving back, I think, to watch the afternoon four balls. With the time difference, makes it easy. So yeah, it should be a good weekend. But of course, we've got bigger issues to discuss than the Ryder Cup.
We do. We'll jump into the latest United news. Basically, what we're going to do at the start of this podcast, we're going to reflect on Nick Cox's departure from the football club. That is some big news this week. It is his last week, and Stephen Torpey has come in. He was at Old Trafford on Wednesday, but of course, at the end of the podcast, we'll look ahead to the Brentford game this weekend at the GT Community Stadium. So, David, as I said, we'll start with Nick Cox. I'll probably do the heavy lifting with this, having covered the academy closely over the last few years. I had a text from a contact that said, "Today is Nick Cox's last day. How on earth that has been allowed to happen is beyond me." And I think that just probably sums it up for me. Nick Cox joined the club in 2016. He was promoted to the head of the academy in 2019. He'll leave behind a fantastic legacy. I mean, where did we start? There's so much work that's gone on behind the scenes. He's improved the club's reputation, the academy's reputation. It was kind of falling behind a little bit. Facilities improved, which was crucial. I think keeping a hold of the best players was one of his first priorities when he came through the door, and improving those facilities has allowed that to happen. I was told a few times actually that Mainoo probably could have left the club. He went to City's academy and United's academy as a boy, and there was opportunities where City kind of came calling and made advances, but Mainoo chose to stay each time, and partly that is because of the work that Cox had done at the academy. And recruitment as well was a big thing, of course. We saw, do you remember David Hannibal Medjbury in 2019? He arrived for a multi-million-pound fee from Monaco. That was a big deal at the time. And then later, Alejandro Garnacho, Alvaro Fernandez, Marc Jurado, all came from Spain in the summer of 2020. Garnacho obviously went on to make over 100 senior appearances, score in the FA Cup final, was sold to Chelsea for £40 million. I think we'd probably both agree that Alvaro Fernandez was the one that got away. He now plays for Real Madrid, but we'll blame Erik ten Hag for that, won't we? I think academy staff are still proud of his journey, watching him play for Real Madrid. But away from that, there was obviously some fantastic results. I think the Youth Cup success in 21-22. What a brilliant night that was. Were you at that game, David, that night?
I wasn't. No, I wasn't. But I mean, yeah, as you say, Steve. I mean, there are huge shoes for to fill with the departure of Nick Cox. And I think talking to people at the club over his time there, the 9 years he spent at United, his philosophy wasn't just to produce players for the first team. It was a kind of holistic approach to producing kind of well-rounded young professionals, if you like. And Sir Alex Ferguson always said this. These young players that come through the academy in Manchester United, they won't all make the first team. They won't all make the grade. But what Manchester United do, or did certainly, because obviously it needed a revamp, but certainly over the last 50, 60 years, was they produced more youth players than any other club that went on to have successful careers elsewhere, professional careers in either in Europe or certainly in the 4 leagues in England. So I think Nick Cox, obviously, as you say, Steve, he oversaw a complete overhaul of the youth system. I remember there's a great story about him signing Alejandro Garnacho. You mentioned Garnacho. He signed obviously in COVID in 2020, and of course, the restrictions at the time permitted, face-to-face contact. So he was signed over a Zoom call. And I remember Nick Cox saying that during the Zoom call, his two boys would have been sort of teenagers at the time, were having a fight somewhere else in the house, an argument, and that almost scuppered any kind of deal to sign Garnacho. But that just shows his commitment, his perseverance to not only attracting the right talent to Manchester United, but developing the right talent. And you mentioned the kind of list of players that he developed and that made their first team debuts. Lots of Kambwala, Amari Folson, obviously Kobe Mainoo, Garnacho, Ethan Wheatley as well. I think he was the 250th.
Yeah, I mean he was the 250th, but it was 35 in total. I think there was 28 while he was head of the academy, but during his 9 years of service, 35 players to make the first team, which is fantastic. And I mean, we were sent some statistics by the club when he was announced he was leaving in the summer. I think I was actually on holiday. I mean, I'll just rattle for a few of the stats now. 25% of the first team minutes between 2019 and 2024 were academy graduates. That's only second to Bayern Munich in Europe's top 5 leagues, which is obviously brilliant. And United ranked second in the Premier League for minutes given to teenagers last season. I mean, you'd have to factor in the injuries with that, wouldn't you? But and of course the continuation of the academy record with over 4,200 games of having an academy graduate in the squad, that has seemed like it's been under threat recently, but it's continued under Cox. So I think the important point though, David, you're right. When you look at these stats, they're brilliant. And of course, they're a huge part of it, delivering tangible results. But the person who he was and what he really cared about, young players, didn't he? He really was a brilliant in that aspect. And I think that came across whenever we spoke to him. You've just touched on that story with Garnacho there. He was a brilliant communicator, really generous with his time. I remember just speaking to him in Carrington in March, just gone. And I mean, he spent, I think, around an hour for way more time than would be expected. So that's one of my takeaways from Nick Cox's time at the club as well.
Yeah, he was always very, very approachable. I mean, as I say, you probably had more dealings with him than I did, but he was always very approachable, very amenable, affable. And of course, that's what you need in that kind of role. You need to be a people person. You can't be aloof. You've got to, have time for everybody. And you've got to have a clear strategy. And that's clearly what he had. And as you say, Steve, the people you've spoken to recently saying, how has that been allowed to happen? I think it's going to be a major, major loss to Manchester United. He's obviously going to Everton as technical director. And United's loss is undoubtedly their gain.
It's been an interesting last 18 months. I mean, obviously, I've been told things behind the scenes that kind of have gone on from different contacts and representatives. And there's been a lot of changes at the academy. There's been a lot of changes at the football club across the board. Obviously, the mass redundancies had an impact, and there were job losses. Of course, that affected the academy as well, and talented staff members were lost. And I think across the last 18 months, it has been different because there has been reduced resources, and obviously, Cox has made the decision to leave. He's done that off his own back, and you're right. It's a big win for Everton. They're getting a brilliant member of staff here, someone who truly cares. It's a different role for him. It'll be a different challenge, but I'm sure he'll take it in his stride, and it'll be exciting to see what he can do over there. Because especially with the new stadium, David, it should be a decent project across on Merseyside.
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, what an opportunity for him to go in there and really impart his knowledge there, the wisdom, over almost a decade at Manchester United. And as I said, United's loss is Everton's gain in the sense of he will be going there with all the expertise, with a track record of producing young talent and keeping young talent at Manchester United. So, yeah, I think it's a great move for him. I mean, obviously, you have to question why he's leaving Manchester United. There's been a lot of upheaval, as you said, on and off the pitch, behind the scenes, with all the redundancies, this kind of drive to make Manchester United more efficient financially and streamline the whole business. But for many people, whether they're players or staff, leaving Manchester United very, very rarely is a step up. And so, with all the changes that are happening, you would think that Nick Cox would like to stay around and be part of this kind of new drive to make Manchester United great again, if you like, to get them back to the levels that they were under Sir Alex Ferguson. That unprecedented era of success. So I think there are obviously questions over why he's leaving. He has his reasons, obviously. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and of course how his successor fares, because as I said earlier, it's their big shoes to fill.
Come on to Stephen Topi in a second. I'll just kind of end this section on Nick Cox by saying I think the academy has tended to produce in really bad moments for the first team. It's weird how that's kind of happened in the last 10 years. In the really bad seasons, you think back to 21-22, David, Solskjaer's sacked, Rangnick comes in, they're still in the doldrums, they're still struggling. and the kids go and win the Youth Cup. It really provided something to be cheer about and to be happy about that season. And even last year, I mean, finished 15th. The under-18s reached the semi-finals of the Youth Cup, losing to eventual winners Aston Villa. So it's weird, isn't it? How it's a bit peculiar how sometimes it often coincides with the first team really struggling, and the academy seems to have form for standing up in those moments and giving fans something to cheer about.
Oh, absolutely, and I think also, as we know, Manchester United fans thrive on, and they've been brought up on, seeing young players graduate, come through the academy, and graduate to the first team. And I think nothing gives Manchester United fans more excitement and more happiness than seeing a young academy graduate make the grade. We've seen it recently with Mainoo. Okay, he's had a stop-start progression, and he's now out the team. And we'll probably come to that later on about whether he'll start, whether he'll get a first Premier League start tomorrow at Brentford. But I think United has been built upon youth, right from the Busby Babes in the 50s through to the class of '92, and I think that's a really proud tradition that has to be the lifeblood of any club, really. And we may touch on this later on, but Sir Jim Ratcliffe, when his stake in the club was ratified, made a point of saying, listen, I don't want to go out and just buy players. Anyone can go and buy Mbappe. I want to unearth the new Kylian Mbappe. I want to unearth the new Jude Bellingham or Roy Keane. So I think there's a real drive now in terms of recruitment and the scouting network to actually recruit players for a financial incentive as well, because if you're paying 70, 80 million for players, you're effectively not maximizing the financial potential. So the scouting network has obviously expanded to include South America, and I think you're going to see a lot of, hopefully, United following the route of clubs like Brighton, who are the standard bearers obviously on that, and Brentford, who they're playing obviously tomorrow, in terms of buying almost unknown talent for a fraction of the price that they are paying for players at the moment, and then hopefully they make the grade. If they don't, there'll be a financial investment they can sell on for a huge profit, in the future. You're looking at the likes of Moses Caicedo, who United were in for a few years ago. They couldn't, well, they didn't go through the deal for about £4 or £5 million. He obviously went then, to Chelsea. I think paid 115 million for him as a then sort of English transfer record. So that's the kind of thing United need to be doing in terms of recruitment. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops in the weeks and months and years ahead under Sir Jim Ratcliffe and this new football leadership structure.
Yeah, and it's Stephen Torpey who's come in. So he's now head of the academy. He comes from Brentford, where he wasn't there for too long. He only started in January 2024. Interesting enough, again, another former Manchester City staff member, another staff member who's worked closely with Jason Wilcox. We've seen a lot of that at the club in the last 18 months, where Wilcox has clearly got his fingerprints over a lot of aspects, over a lot of appointments. And it is obviously heavily driven by Wilcox, this appointment. Having said that, Torpey has got strong credentials. You look at the work he did at Manchester City, working with Cole Palmer, James McAtee, Rico Lewis. City have developed a reputation having that as being the best academy in the Premier League at developing talent, whether that be for the first team or to sell it on and supplement first team signings. I think in conversations with Nick Cox, I think obviously there is an element of that within the academy, and especially in this era of PSR, you do need to sell players. But he was really hungry to prevent the academy purely from just becoming a cash cow for the first team building. So I think you have to get the balance right in that sense, which will be difficult. And I did think Torpey was at the game on Wednesday, and I wondered to myself what he was thinking watching the under-21s, how he will impact the academy. I think a lot more will become clear in the next few months. Hopefully we get a chance to sit down and speak to him. He sat next to Jason Wilcox in the director's box on Wednesday night, which was obviously probably no surprise. And an interesting little nugget as well, David. I think I'd mentioned Torpey before we came on air, but he was actually FC United of Manchester. He was their first goal scorer in 2005 after they were created. So a little nugget from Torpey. He was born in Kirby as well, so I'm not sure. Kirby fans will start turning him quickly if they realise. I'm not actually sure. It's probably a question I'll have to ask him if I get a chance to sit down with him. Yeah, that'll be at the top of the agenda.
I won't last long if you're a Liverpool fan.
We'll move on then, David, because you've just kind of mentioned the recruitment there. And it's interesting because United have reached an agreement to sign teenage midfielder Christian Orozco. Now, we're not going to pretend that we know everything about Orozco because he's 17. He's captained Colombia's under-17s. He plays for Fortaleza. I hope I haven't botched that pronunciation, but I would have, yeah. So we're obviously not going to know much about him. But as you said, it hints at a wider recruitment change, doesn't it? In the last 18 months, we've seen this with Ineos, we've seen it with Diego Leon, with Seko Kone, these young players who are from non-European markets. They're very raw. They can maybe sign them for a cheaper price. And it's essentially these deals, as you made the point yourself, they're low risk and high reward, because if you can get these players in for very cheap, perhaps a few £1 million, if they go on and establish themselves in the Premier League, there is huge upside there. And I guess the worst case scenario is you still sell them for a little bit of profit a few years later.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we touched on this a few minutes ago. This has kind of been driven, obviously, by Jason Wilcox, who obviously had kind of experience of a similar model at Manchester City, and it's really an initiative that, as I say, has been followed by fellow Premier League clubs for years with much more success than Manchester United, and they're a bit late to the party in this sense. I think United spent in excess of 1 billion on players on transfers, probably 1.2 billion in the 12 years since Sir Alex Ferguson stepped down, and that's just a complete waste of money in the sense of what does that financial outlay yielded in terms of success? Okay, League Cup, FA Cup, Europa League, but in that time United have not been challenging for the Premier League, not been challenging for the Champions League, so they needed a reset. They needed a kind of a cultural reset, as they like to call it at Manchester United, and this seems to be a strategic way of doing that. And I think it will, as you say, it's low risk, high reward. If you can get these young players in from around the globe for knockdown prices, but prices that if it doesn't work out, it's not a huge financial hit. But if it does work out and they are successful first team players, there's a fantastic reward there. If it doesn't work out and you can sell them on for profit, you've lost nothing. So I think that is a strategy that they will adopt. And of course, as you say, we don't know much about Orzoko. But you've seen it with Chido Obi as well. They brought him in. They brought Aidan Heaven in from Arsenal. I mean, it's obviously we're looking at the network of players around the world, but equally they're looking at bringing young players in for low outlay to them to maybe sell on, or ideally to be regular fixtures in the first team for years to come. So I think it's a strategy that's long overdue at Manchester United, one that their rivals have had great success at. And as I say, they're a bit late to the party on this one, but it's not too late. They can follow this strategy, follow this philosophy, and it will yield success. But you've got to have the right structure in place. You've got to have the right scouting network around the globe. And we've heard various stories over the last decade about how United have stripped back their scouting network, how they're revamping it. Whatever they're doing behind the scenes, it hasn't yielded the young talent that it should be doing. So hopefully with this new approach, that will be the outcome.
I think they have been doing it, but the difference is it was heavily in Europe. So obviously with Brexit rules, it's affected who they can sign. And now the academy recruitment to sign a player under 18 is essentially just in Britain. It's a British recruitment drive, which is, you're right, exactly why we've seen Aidan Heaven come into the football club, Chido Obi. There's a few of us who have been signed. James Overy came over from England. So players who are under 18 can only really be signed from England. And then that's why they're then broadening their horizons across into these new markets, into South America, maybe Africa as well, with obviously Seko Kone from Mali. So that is interesting to see, but it makes a lot more sense because of these rules. You saw Garnacho, as I mentioned. He was a great example of a European signing, Alvaro Fernandez. So they did kind of get that right in Europe, but I think it's maybe took them a little bit time to react to these new rules, and inevitably there is change and you need to send your scouts to different areas. And there's probably, these players are slightly, I'd say, a bit more unknown. You are going to have a scouting network out there, but is there going to be a dossier like there would be on European players? Probably not. So again, really interesting. And hopefully we see Orozco when he does come in next year, because he'll have to wait, of course, until he turns 18. He will be given time, but hopefully we see potential, because we've seen that in glimpses in pre-season with Diego Leon. You out in the United States, David, you saw it yourself.
Yeah.
But he hasn't made a first team appearance this season. He played for the under-21s recently. So these players do need time, but you're right. If they can get it right and they're given patience, there could be a huge payoff there, definitely. But we'll move on to Kobbie Mainoo then, David. I kind of put out a story this week after speaking to a contact about Mainoo, and I was essentially told he's doing everything that he can to fight for his place. It was all the good stuff that you wanted to hear, essentially. He's knuckled down, he's working hard, he's even changed his personal chef at home to try unlock some improvement. We discussed Mainoo, I think, on the last podcast that we touched upon him, and Ruben Amram's comments. This weekend feels like a big opportunity for Mainoo, doesn't it? Because Casemiro is suspended. And I will say, obviously, you'd think Ugarte would come in for him because Amram said Ugarte and Casemiro are competing. But is this not a really big opportunity, despite that, for Mainoo to play and to make his first Premier League start?
A huge opportunity, Steve, for Mainoo. And I think it will test Ruben Amram's, see whether he means what he says when he said, "I love Kobbie. He's a great player. He's not the finished article. He needs to do more. He needs to track back. He needs to have better positional awareness." A couple of weeks ago at the pre-match press conference, he was fairly brutal in his criticism of Kobbie Mainoo. I think it was delivered with a sense of wanting Kobbie to improve, not to really knock him down at all and knock his confidence further, because obviously, he's in a tough place at the moment, not being a regular starter for Manchester United. But I think tomorrow will be a huge test of okay, put your money where your mouth is in terms of, if you really have faith in Kobbie Mainoo, put him into this team. Now, the problem is you've got, as we discussed, on Monday, Steve, is that with Amram's rigid 3-4-3 formation or 3-4-2-1, whichever way you want to, dice it up, he's obsessed with playing Fernandes in the midfield role, central midfield role, alongside Casemiro. Casemiro is now taken out of the equation. If you put Mainoo in there, you haven't got a great deal of defensive cover there. So the logical thing would be for Ugarte to come in. Now, I don't think Ugarte's played particularly well since he joined Manchester United. I don't think he's been lived up to expectations, but he has more of a defensive mindset, obviously, than Kobbie Mainoo. So I fear for Kobbie that will be that Ugarte will come in for him and Kobbie would be on the bench again. Now, the other option is whether, and I don't think this will happen, whether Ruben decides to push Bruno further forward into one of those two number 10 roles alongside maybe Mbeumo, and then play Ugarte and Mainoo as the midfield two. I think that's highly unlikely, but I think it will be a real kick in the teeth to Kobbie if he finds himself on the bench again tomorrow lunchtime at Brentford. And as you said, Steve, the story you did and the people you've spoken to are saying he's doing everything he can to get back into the starting lineup. He's a young player. Success happened so quickly for him, with Manchester United, with England. Obviously, he started for England in the Euro 2024 final defeat to Spain. He's brilliant on the ball in tight spaces. He credits that with playing a lot of futsal when he was younger, when he was a teenager growing up or a young player coming through the ranks. But he still has a long way to go in terms of his development. In terms of his sort of positional awareness, his speed, his defensive duties. He's a great talent, but he needs to be nurtured the right way. And you do wonder, you do fear that if his kind of exile, if you like, for want of a better word, from the first team continues, what effect that will have on him, because we know he wanted to go out on loan, just to get some regular playing time. Obviously, he's got one eye on the World Cup in America and Canada and Mexico next year. He wasn't in the latest England squad. For a player that started the Euro 2024 final, that's a massive fall from grace. So there are lots of different issues and factors around Kobbie. He may well push for a move in January on loan if he's not playing. And if he's not playing, you can't blame him for that. I don't doubt his commitment to Manchester United, but he has to think of himself as well. He has to think of his own career. And he's 2021 now. He has to be playing regular football. And if that's not happening, obviously the League Cup has now gone for Manchester United. There's no European football. There aren't many fixtures. There aren't any fixtures really where if he's not playing the Premier League, he can get a look in. So it's going to be fascinating to see tomorrow. I fear that he'll be on the bench again, but I hope I'm proved wrong.
I completely agree. I think last weekend I made the case that it was probably time to move Fernandes further forward and play Mainoo in a deeper role, especially with Kuna coming back from injury, because it seemed to be that he would be on the bench. He wouldn't maybe be thrown straight into the starting lineup. But now Kuna's had another week. He's back up to speed. You'd expect probably Kuna and Mbeumo would be in the number 10 roles. And then that begs the question, as you've just said, does Mainoo complement Fernandes, or is it Ugarte? And Amram said a few times now that it's Fernandes and Mainoo competing, and it's Ugarte and Casemiro competing. It's an interesting one because we're talking about it and we just kind of can't see how he's going to fit into the system. And it's strange because he's such a fantastic football player. We've all seen it. He's a wonderful talent. Having said that, I agree there is obviously more to come. He still needs to develop and still needs to improve his game. But he is good enough to be starting for United, I believe. And you talk about England there. I was told it is a huge motivation for him. And you're right, it would be a huge kick in the teeth to play for England in that final last summer against Spain and then not even be included in the squad in the United States. From his perspective, that would be really disappointing and it would represent regression. He was disappointed not to go out on loan in the final week of the window, but it's all about how you react with that. And I mean, we saw Alejandro Garnacho at the end of last season spit out his dummy, didn't we, David? But by all accounts, Mainoo has reacted in the complete opposite manner, which is reassuring.
Yeah, and I think that's what you want to see as a manager. That's what fans want to see. They want to see a player knuckle down, as you say, not throw his toys out the pram like Garnacho did and demand a move. And not put your own interests above those of the team, which I think obviously was the case with Garnacho. But I can sympathise with Cobby in the sense of if he's doing everything he can behind the scenes and in training to maximise his potential and really show Ruben Amorim and his staff that he's ready to start and he's not starting, that psychologically that can be so demoralising. Must be so demoralising for a young player. But I think it really is a test of his mentality, and his resolve, because obviously he's a really young player, as we said. He's had success, so early in his career. The kind of trajectory has been so upward, and now he's kind of plateaued. And we've seen it with young players in the past. Maybe sometimes they need a setback. They need I wouldn't say a reality check, but they need to kind of, maybe just take stock and go back to doing what got them there in the first place, and really kick on from there. But I think the trouble is, until the system changes, which we know is not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think Cobby gets into this team. Whether Ruben Amorim will be bold tomorrow and play Fernandes and Mainoo, I'm not so sure. But
so what's it going to take if he said the Pope isn't going to make him change his formation? Is it an intervention from Donald Trump? Is Donald Trump above the Pope? We're getting into dangerous territory there.
I wouldn't think Ruben's a Donald Trump fan. I mean,
no, I
don't think so.
Yeah.
It's hard to see, isn't it, where he fits into this rigid system. If he went to a four at the back and a four in midfield, or you could see a way back, you see a way in for him. But given Ruben is so wedded to this system and has been so steadfast in not changing it, that really limits his opportunities. And as you said, Steve, he's categorically said it's Bruno and Cobby for one place and Casemiro and Ugarte for the other. And
I think it's a failure on Amorim's behalf if he doesn't fit him into the system. It's on him to make it work. And you think back to Erik ten Hag, who, let's face it, we criticised his midfield setup a lot, and there was a lot of space at times. But he described Mainoo as the ultimate midfielder. A few months later, Gareth Southgate comes out and says, we've never really had a player like him in the England setup for a long, long time. When two managers are saying such things, and you can scrutinise Southgate's credentials as a manager, but he's clearly such a talent. We've seen it ourselves. You think back to his debut at Goodison Park, his full Premier League debut at the end of 2023. To do that in your first full appearance in the Premier League, you are such a brilliant player. Amorim needs to make it work, doesn't he? And this weekend is crucial. I think if he doesn't start this weekend, then we're looking ahead to Sunderland. Then it's the October international break, and we're really thinking, okay, maybe this situation is going to be revisited in the January window, because, as you've said, with the World Cup on the horizon, you probably have to take stock of the situation again and say, look, I've done all I can. I've tried to make it work. I'm still not being played. What more can I do? Hopefully it doesn't happen. Hopefully it doesn't unfold in that way. This weekend is a huge chance for Amorim to win back-to-back Premier League games for the first time. David, we touched on that unwanted statistic in the last podcast. All of a sudden, it's weird, isn't it, how football, the mood changes, because it was so negative after the Manchester City defeat. United get a good win against Chelsea, a spirited performance, and all of a sudden Brentford and Sunderland look very winnable, and there's a real chance for momentum heading into the October international break. They've got to seize it, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you know, Steve, from your time covering the club, I've been covering United for 24 years now. They're only ever one game away from a crisis. It's kind of feast or famine with Manchester United. The scrutiny, the focus, the interest is so huge on every game, on every result. But you're right. I mean, it's an extraordinary stat that Ruben Amorim has not managed to win back-to-back Premier League games. He's been in charge now for 10 years, coming up a year. I think it was November the 11th he took charge officially last year. So it's 10, 11 months now. Even David Moyes, I think I mentioned on Monday, even David Moyes managed to win back-to-back games on 7 occasions. He only lasted 10 months at Manchester United. So it really is an unwanted stat, as you said, and one that I don't think he'll be too worried about it. But I think what he wants to do is start building, a winning run, building momentum. That's what you have to do. You have to kind of, you can't keep taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You've got to build on the Chelsea win. And it was such a gritty, hard-fought win. The character that Manchester United showed in that win. Okay, they made it harder for themselves than they needed been with Casemiro's needless sending off, but the character, the defensive discipline, the determination, all the elements that weren't there against Manchester City were there against Chelsea. So you have to build on that. And we spoke to Luke Shaw in the mix zone afterwards, and he said we have to build on this. We have to go into every game believing we can win, and that has to be the mindset. And too often, as you've seen under Ruben, they've won a game, and it's proved a false dawn. So, they have to kind of harness that energy that they took, and that positivity they took from the Chelsea win, and take it into this Brentford game. Because after that, they've got Sunderland has started the Premier League campaign really well, but that's a game Manchester United should be winning at home to Sunderland next Saturday as well. So if they can go into the international break with a win against Chelsea, a win against Brentford, and a win against Sunderland, okay, you've got Liverpool at Anfield up after that, which is a totally different proposition. We all know that. But, that would change the whole mood around the club and the mood around Amorim. I know the club are backing him. I know they've said that there's no intention of his position being called into question. It's a long-term project, one that they always knew would take time, and there would be setbacks and, that such like. But I think it's so important for him and for Manchester United to get back-to-back wins, tomorrow, take that into the Sunderland game, win that one, and then go into the international break, on the back of 3 successive wins, and probably nudging towards the European places at that stage.
I must admit though, David, I'm getting some PTSD here because I saw United are wearing the black new third kit at the G-Tech. So wearing that kit for the first time, right? Unveiling their third kit. Do you remember how could you forget 3 years ago, August 2022, the 4-0, United wore that green slime third kit. It was the first time they'd wore that kit at the GTEC Community Stadium again, away at Brentford. So hopefully there's not some symmetry there and we don't see a similar result. And Burmo scored that day. He's now playing for United. I think he's actually made a very good start. He's obviously scored 2 goals against Grimsby and then against Burnley. But I think his performances have probably been a lot better than his numbers. It's obviously hard to rack up great numbers after there's only been, 5 or 6 games. But he's made a very good start, hasn't he, as expected, because we all saw what a brilliant football player he was over a sustained period down there in London. And when you're signing a Premier League proven player, there's bound to be, when you see that obviously European players come in, there's a period of adaptation there and you need to give them time to settle. There's been none of that with Mbeumo. He's hit the ground running and he looks the part, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, as you mentioned, I was out in the US with United on the pre-season tour. There were only 3 games on the tour, but Mbeumo was behind the rest of the squad in terms of his pre-season preparation, in terms of his fitness. So he didn't start. It didn't feature until the last game in Atlanta against Everton, and you can see then, his energy levels were a bit low. I think he was only restricted to 45 minutes there. And I think he played about 75 minutes in the 1-1 draw against Fiorentina, the friendly at Old Trafford, which was the last warm-up game before the season started. But he started every single Premier League game, since then. So that shows you, how highly Ruben Amorim rates him. He's obviously was voted United's Player of the Month for August, which is some achievement given, it's your first month at the club. And the quality of player you've got, the likes of Bruno Fernandes, who again was, started the season, in inspirational form. I think it was incredible against Chelsea with his work rate. But you expect that from Bruno week in, week out, that commitment. But Mbeumo certainly, the 2 goals, he should have had 3 really. It was a fantastic save from Donnarumma in the derby. I mean, the way he took that volley, that left foot volley,
fantastic that, wasn't it?
Oh, unbelievable. We were kind of behind it in the press box, and you could see it going straight in. It was a spectacular volley and an equally spectacular save from Donnarumma. So I think you're right, Steve. I think not just his goals, but his work rate, his runs in behind. Of course, his run in behind the defence. Won the penalty again. That's not the penalty. Sorry, won the free kick against Chelsea last Saturday, and obviously led to Sanchez's red card for taking him out. And Ruben said afterwards that it was those kind of runs. You want to play to his strengths, the characteristics he showed in his 6 years at Brentford. You want to play to those strengths. And I've watched that goal back 3 or 4 times. And as soon as Van der launches the ball, and Bremer knows what's happening. He's anticipating the flick on from Sesko, and he's already sort of stolen the march on his. I think it was Fofana. I think it might have been the closest one to him, or I can't remember who it was. But the two players who were kind of pursuing him, he'd already stolen the march on them. That enabled him to get to the ball first, enabled him to get to the ball ahead of Sanchez, and ultimately drew the foul that saw Chelsea reduced to 10 men. So I think they will maximise that. I think you'll see a lot of that. Bremer, cutting in, running in behind defences, using his speed, his physicality to really make that count. And I think I wrote a piece earlier in the week saying that he could prove to be the signing of the summer. Obviously, they've spent big money on Sesko. He's had a slow start, but you'd expect that because he's not Premier League ready, if you like Mbeumo and Mateus Cunha are. But I think Mbeumo, the way he started, as you said, Steve, with such positivity, and he slotted straight into the team, and the fact that he started every single Premier League game, I think tells you that he's going to be a permanent fixture for much of this season.
It was 4-3 to Brentford when United visited the G-Tech last season. But it was a weird part of the season because United didn't have anything to play for in the Premier League, and it was all about the Europa League, of course. And I think Tyler Fredrickson and Harry Amas started that day. So it's bound to be a little bit different on Saturday. Having said that, it always seems to be a tricky game against Brentford, doesn't it? The 1-1 2 seasons ago away in London, I mean, Brentford battered United for most of the game, thought they'd won it with Mason Mount to death, and they'd obviously responded in added time. United should have had the game wrapped up once scoring, but unfortunately Brentford found a way back in the dying seconds. They have made a lot of changes. Keith Andrews is in charge. Thomas Frank's obviously at Tottenham, and Burmo's joined United. Johan Wissa has moved to Newcastle. So it is a weaker side, but no, it's such a cliche, but it's true. No game in the Premier League is easy these days, is it? No,
and you're right. It has kind of proved a tricky ground for United. I think they've only won once there, haven't they? I think it was the first season Brentford were up in 21-22. I think that was the only time United had won down there. So the results say it is a tricky ground. I mean, you mentioned Bremer, Wissa. I think they lost Flecken, didn't they, as well, and the goalkeeper. And I think they also lost Damsgaard, didn't they, to Arsenal. So that's all four of those were first team players, regular starters, automatic picks. So to take a third of your team out almost is a huge loss. So they had to have a period of adjustment. And of course, they lost Thomas Frank to Tottenham, the manager who oversaw their rise to the Premier League. So it is a big adjustment for them. I think they've only won one of the opening 5 Premier League games. They're down in 17th, I think it is. But all that aside, it's still a tricky ground to go to. They'll be up for it. It's a tight ground. United have struggled there in the past. So, but again, it comes back to harnessing the positivity of the Chelsea win. Knowing that they've got the players now. And really sort of taking the game to Brentford, I think that was the kind of the disappointment, I think, for Ruben Amorim, that United raced that 2-0 lead against Chelsea, and then Casemiro's red card obviously changed the whole complexion of it. But that's been the problem. I think Brentford, Burnley as well was a classic case of they really should have put that game to bed by half time. They should have been 3 or 4-0 up. The chances they created, where they dominated against Burnley, and then they need a 97th minute penalty from Bruno to win it 3-2. So they do tend to make life harder for themselves than need be. And I hope, and obviously United fans hope, that tomorrow we see a much more straightforward performance, and United can go and on the front foot and dominate the game from the start, and have none of this kind of angst and concern, and letting the opponents back into the game, and then having to hold themselves over the winning line right at the death. And that's the consistency that Amorim's looking for, not just in results, but more importantly in terms of performance. You want to see a consistency of performance going forward, where Manchester United take the game to the opponents, as they did, in the glory days under Sir Alex Ferguson. We've seen signs of it. We've seen sporadic signs of it. Luke Shaw was saying, we can't just dominate for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. We've got to do it for the whole 90 plus minutes. So that's the challenge now.
I hope we see the aggression levels that we saw last weekend. I think that was key to that performance, wasn't it? And Aaron discussed that in his pre-Chelsea press conference. He said, we really need to be aggressive. I want to see that. Someone from Brentford had reached out for the programme notes to myself, and I'd mentioned that he asked, what should we expect? And I said, aggression. So if they get it right and they approach the game in the same manner, hopefully they come flying out the traps, make a good start, but crucially, take the chances. It'd be brilliant to see Sesko actually get off the mark, wouldn't it? Because the longer that rumbles on, the more there's going to be a conversation around Sesko.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this on Monday. I felt disappointed for him that he had to come off for a tactical switch on last Saturday against Chelsea, because obviously United were down to 10 men. He provided the flick on for that, what ultimately led to the red card for the Chelsea goalkeeper Sanchez. And I think he really, he was quite passive, and Ruben said he was on his own against City. There was no one around him. He looked quite isolated there, but I thought he was more engaged, more involved. He was coming to collect the ball. He was just a different player, I thought, against Chelsea. He looked more comfortable, playing in the system. And it was a shame that he had to come off. Now, hopefully, there are no such dramas tomorrow for United, and hopefully, as you say, he can get off the mark and really kick on from where he left off against Chelsea. Because I thought, he looked like he's finding his feet against Chelsea. It was just unfortunate that he had to come off, but hopefully he can actually play. Maybe not the full 90, but certainly play a significant part of the game tomorrow and get off the mark, because that will do his confidence the world of good. Strikers thrive on goals, and ultimately that's what they're judged by. So he needs to get off the mark soon.
Yeah, sooner rather than later, hopefully, for Benjamin Sesko. We'll leave it there then, David, because we're pushed for time. Thanks again.
Cheers, Steve.
Thanks to listeners. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the game. We'll be back after the weekend to reflect on the performance, and hopefully it's 3 points. Take care.